Attorney General Sessions, appreciate your willingness to appear before the committee today.
I did not remember that. I have no idea. I don't recall it. I just don't remember it, but I still do not recall it. I don't have any recollection. I don't know how that occurred. Well, I'd have to rack my brain, but I don't recall it now. I don't recall any such meeting. I don't recall it. I don't know. I don't recall that.
Just on the first page of your 3 pages of written testimony, you wrote, "Nor do I recall, do not have recollection, do not remember it." So my question is, for any of your testimony today, did you refresh your memory with any written documents?
I've said before that I am a firm believer in the power of stupidity and the power of denial. That is to say, stupidity is usually a more than sufficient explanation for the seeming complexity of a clusterfuck, and denial is sometimes so overpowering it's like watching a Mitch McConnell retreat into its shell, an interior world of comforting lies and rationalizations. But I have to admit that as the Russiagate scandal bounces along, the ability of Trumpists to deny, deflect, and obfuscate their situation is reaching levels that still somehow manage to be surprising to this thinking ape. To give you some context to judge it by, I have to reach into the archives for a man named Warren Jeffs, leader and so-called prophet of a splinter sect of Mormonism known as the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or FLDS if you can't chew that mouthful. His movement had all the hallmarks of a typical cult: a single charismatic figure at the center of the organization, informationally and geographically isolated followers, brainwashing, abuse, and the inability of members to criticize the prophet, or the prophet himself to receive the faintest whiff of criticism. Jeffs reportedly had 70 wives and regularly abused the children on his compound. The latter fact led to his downfall. Word eventually got out to the authorities about Jeffs. He found himself on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, but it barely made a dent in his following. He was arrested and convicted by a jury, and still they clung to him, or the idea of him, despite all the evidence. Then, after some quality time in the slammer, Jeffs was taped saying the following to his brother.
"I'm not the prophet. I never was the prophet. And I have been deceived by the powers of evil."
Did you hear that? I am not the prophet. I never was the prophet. From his own mouth. Brothers and sisters, this is the paradox of the human mind that gives me the most trouble in these troubled times. Because, you see, not even when the fraud admitted he was a fraud did his followers desert him. They stayed on the compound, saying God knows what to each other, coming up with God knows what excuses, justifications, and rationalizations in order to keep believing. They were so invested in this abusive, sick man that even when he admitted he had been lying and abusing them the entire time, they still rushed to his defense, and I suspect their own psychological defense. Because if any of them allowed themselves to see the horror, perhaps they would feel implicated in it themselves. Sometimes it's easier to avoid the mirror than look in it. This week, the Russiagate scandal took on several new contours. Jeff Sessions was questioned under oath and assured the world that, well, he couldn't recall much of anything. But at any rate, he has no knowledge of any collusion with the Russians. He may even be telling a half-truth there, but oddly he was determined to not answer several of the most important questions posed to him, citing an imaginary privilege he himself was forced to invent on the spot when the president opted not to claim the otherwise legal executive privilege Sessions might have used. He just refused to answer. A bad look when you're trying to clear yourself and your boss of wrongdoing. On the home front, Donald Trump floated the idea through several surrogates, including his lapdog Sean Hannity, that perhaps firing Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller was in the cards, a notion that harkens back to the 11th hour of Watergate, the only scandal by which we seem able to compare our present circumstance. Having already fired Director Comey under the ludicrous pretense that he was too mean to Hillary Clinton, an excuse Trump himself promptly detonated when he confessed the real reason to Lester Holt on CNN, and finding himself still surrounded by slavish allies and surrogates still willing to self-immolate, he figured, what the hell, why not one step further? And finally, the real trump card. As I was preparing this commentary, the Washington Post reported that Donald Trump is personally under investigation for, wait for it, obstruction of justice. This is what you might call a gateway crime. A door that once opened can lead to a host of other illegalities. And since multiple members of Team Trump, we learned, are also under investigation for financial crimes, it's hard to imagine a scenario where the investigation stops with mere obstruction. And, of course, all of this is happening under the cloud of a scandal big enough all on its own. Our intelligence services have confirmed that Russia meddled in the election, and we're slowly uncovering that it was worse than originally thought, and may have included intrusions into voter databases. The scandal is that Trump and his campaign, acting with full knowledge of Russian interference, were sprinting to lift sanctions on Russia even before Trump was sworn in. A staggering display of disloyalty that all by itself should turn off any rational observer from supporting Comrade Trump. But it doesn't, and that's my point here today. Because the members of Trump's cult, if Twitter is any indication, are having a bit of trouble these days. It seems no matter what is uncovered, no matter how many times Trump and his deflections are carpet-bombed by facts, there remains a core base of support so deep in denial that I have little recourse except to compare it to the original Kool-Aid drinkers and cults like them. I have a creeping suspicion that even if Trump is impeached, arrested, and in prison for high crimes, there will still be a segment of the country braying about fake news and leakers because, Deep Throat was the real problem, not Nixon. The Trump voter situation is even worse than it appears, too, because the New York Times long ago uncovered a tape which is almost as damning as Warren Jeff's midnight confession. I wasn't able to dig up the audio, but it's out there. While being interviewed by Pulitzer Prize winner Michael D'Antonio, Trump was asked to contemplate the meaning of his life. His response tells you everything, Trump voter. Everything you ever needed to know. It's right here in plain sight. No, I don't want to think about it, Trump replied. I don't like to analyze myself, because I might not like what I see.
I am not the prophet. I never was the prophet. And I have been deceived by the powers of evil.